Financing for Development. Unlocking Investment Opportunities. Opportunities for Economic Transformation in Africa with KY Amoako.
In order to meet the SDGs, it is imperative for Africa to maintain a sharp focus on economic transformation. By 2050, sub-Saharan Africa will have a larger and younger workforce than China or India. This, together with the continent's abundant land and natural resources, can be harnessed and are ripe conditions for economic transformation. Already, we have seen impressive economic growth in many African countries since the mid-1990s. Coupled with the improvements in governance and investor confidence, these trends support prospects for better jobs, sustainable growth, and shared prosperity. Still, African countries must do more to leverage that growth with sustainable development policies and plans that focus, for instance, on increasing productivity in agriculture, developing strong manufacturing industries, and boosting regional integration and trade. Africa needs more than economic growth to sustain its recent progress and embrace opportunities. It needs transformation. And we believe that African countries can transform by diversifying their production and exports, boosting their competitiveness in world markets, and increasing their share of manufacturing in GDPs. These measures, along with others, will boost prosperity, reduce dependence on foreign assistance, and increase resilience to shocks. Financing Africa's transformation will be a challenge, but it can be done. With the international development aid landscape changing and the shift from MDGs to the more comprehensive SDGs, African nations will have to raise far more financial resources domestically than ever before. For example, Africa will need to fund 50 to 80% of its infrastructure development from domestic resources. And most African countries are beginning to rise to the challenge. According to the African Development Bank, official development assistance, ODA, exceeds domestic resources in only 12 African countries. Yet, while this is indeed noteworthy, still much more can be done, particularly in the area of tax administration. Despite improvements in recent years, Africa's tax revenues are still the lowest of any region. The current tax base is narrow, inefficient, and highly vulnerable to corruption. Revenue losses from illicit financial flows can amount to $50 billion per year. These resources could go a long way with appropriate tax reform schemes to tap taxes from informal sector as a way of mobilizing funds for development. Up to an additional $246 billion annually between now and 2030 will be needed to reduce poverty by half. To meet this demand will require an overhaul of the current taxation structures in most sub-Saharan African countries. Where tax bases are narrow, taxes are barely progressive, exemptions are widespread, the capacity of tax administration is weak, and there is a preponderance of hard-to-tax economic activities because of the large informal sector. These features together create room for tax evasion. One promising source of tax revenue is property taxation, which is very, very poorly developed in Africa. Another is increasing the pace of formalizing Africa's huge and very active informal sector. Taxation from natural resources can also be optimized, along with developing a system to track commercial, mobile, and other digital money transfers, which could yield considerable revenue. Furthermore, African countries should re-examine the value of tax incentives and exemptions, which greatly reduce tax revenues. Some 80% of countries rely on tax holidays to attract foreign investment, but governments should consider that many of these investors would have set up their operations even without such incentives. Encouragingly, initiatives to utilize technology in tax collection has resulted both in higher revenues and greater compliance. Local capital markets are becoming a significant source of finance in some African countries as well. Ghana, for example, raised $196 million on the back of a 5-year local bond, with considerable resources flowing from the private sector to fund infrastructure projects. Rwanda as well has initiated the Agasiro Development Fund, in addition to pension and insurance funds to support the finance sector. Underlying each challenge to economic transformation in Africa is a deeper and more general issue: how to establish a strategic relationship between government and the private sector actors that makes it possible to address these problems without repeating the errors that derailed transformational ventures in the past. In the joint paper we did with the Overseas Development Institute, ODI, on public and private sector collaboration for economic transformation, we found several actions that can strengthen private-public collaboration for transformation. First, building a shared vision of economic transformation that has the buy-in of politicians, the private sector, and general citizenry. Second, putting in place a strong agency that can effectively coordinate the government's role. Third, ensuring public agencies develop formal and informal networks and information sharing platforms with the private sector that offers them incentives for collective action. Fourth, encouraging mutually enforceable performance standards by promoting behavioral and productivity changes over certain periods of time in those firms and sectors that are technically assessed as promising for economic transformation. And fifth, building an effective process of feedback and learning into the public-private collaboration. Finally, supporting economic transformation in Africa requires working at 3 levels. At the African continental level, to set the transformation agenda and vision. At the country level, with governments, the private sector, and other stakeholders to chart a transformation course and set priorities around key issues. And at the institutional level, to engage policymakers to build capacity and strengthen the institutions charged with implementing a transformation agenda. Actions on all these fronts are key. Their combined impacts has the potential to transform Africa, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty and placing Africa firmly on a trajectory of shared and sustainable prosperity as envisioned by the SDGs.